The whisper before the storm. Detective Ethan Harper walked into the precinct with the same confidence he carried every morning. The chatter of officers, the hum of phones, and the occasional burst of laughter made up the symphony of a place where justice, or what passed for it, was administered. Ethan thrived in this environment, his sharp eyes always scanning the room, his reputation preceding him. But beneath his polished badge and stern demeanor lay a shadowed truth he'd managed to keep hidden. Today, that darkness would begin to surface. Across town, Judge Ayanna Williams prepared for her day in a vastly different setting. Ayanna's chambers were a sanctuary of wisdom and discipline, walls adorned with degrees and plaques, reminders of her unwavering pursuit of justice. She was a beacon in the legal system, admired and feared in equal measure for her no-nonsense approach to corruption. At 8 months pregnant, Ayanna carried herself with grace, her hand often resting protectively over her belly, a reminder of the life growing within her. "Your Honor, the DA sent over additional evidence for tomorrow's case," her clerk said, placing a thick folder on her desk. Ayanna smiled warmly. "Thank you, Janet. Tomorrow could set the precedent we've been waiting for." But even as she spoke, a nagging unease lingered in her mind. Threats had become a norm, the price of dismantling powerful networks of crime and corruption. Some threats were subtle, others blatant, but Ayanna had always risen above them, determined to bring change. This time, though, the tension felt different, heavier, like a storm cloud gathering on the horizon. Meanwhile, Ethan received a tip on his phone. A simple, anonymous message. "Suspicious activity near Judge Williams' residence tonight. Investigate quietly." Ethan's brow furrowed. Ayanna Williams wasn't just any judge. She was the most revered and feared figure in the judicial system. She was untouchable, or so the public believed. Yet Ethan, driven by a mix of personal biases and professional pride, had long viewed her with suspicion. To him, no one was beyond reproach, and this tip was a chance to confirm what he'd always suspected. As night fell, Ethan parked a block away from Ayanna's upscale home. It was a quiet, leafy neighborhood where security cameras and manicured lawns gave an illusion of safety. His fingers tapped impatiently on the steering wheel as he watched the house through binoculars. Hours passed, the suburban silence interrupted only by the occasional bark of a dog or the hum of passing cars. Just as fatigue began to set in, a shadow moved near the house. Ethan's pulse quickened. A hooded figure approached the gate, their movements deliberate. With a practiced hand, they unlocked the gate and slipped inside. Adrenaline surged through Ethan as he exited his car, keeping to the shadows. His hand instinctively rested on the grip of his firearm, a crutch he leaned on far too easily. Inside the house, Ayanna was alone, her evening winding down with a cup of tea and legal briefs. She'd left the gate unlocked for her clerk, who often delivered late-night documents, but tonight it wasn't Janet who entered. The hooded figure was a presence Ayanna didn't yet notice. Ethan crept closer, his instincts in overdrive. Peering through a window, he saw Ayanna reviewing documents at her desk. His suspicion deepened as he noticed the figure rummaging in a nearby room. Quietly, Ethan entered through the ajar door, his gun drawn. "Stop right there," he barked, startling both Ayanna and the intruder. The hooded figure froze for a moment before bolting toward the back of the house. Ethan gave chase, his boots echoing against the hardwood floor. The figure darted through the back door, disappearing into the night. Frustrated, Ethan holstered his weapon and returned to the main room, where Ayanna stood, her composure intact despite the chaos. "Detective Harper," she said, her tone both questioning and accusatory. "What are you doing in my home?" Ethan, still catching his breath, gestured toward the papers on her desk. "I received a tip about suspicious activity here. Care to explain why someone was snooping around?" Ayanna's sharp gaze bore into him. "I don't owe you an explanation, detective. If you're here to accuse me of something, I suggest you tread carefully." Ethan took a step closer, his voice firm. "You're a powerful woman, Judge Williams, but no one's above the law. Whoever that was, they were after something. And I think you know what." Ayanna squared her shoulders, her hand instinctively resting on her belly. "I'm not in the habit of justifying myself to those who come uninvited into my home. If you have evidence, present it. Otherwise, leave." Her unwavering demeanor gave Ethan pause. For the first time, he felt the weight of her authority not as an abstract concept, but as an undeniable force. Yet his biases wouldn't let him back down. "This isn't over," he said, his voice low. "Good," Ayanna replied coldly, "because I have nothing to hide." As Ethan left, his mind raced with questions. Who was the intruder? What were they looking for? And why had Ayanna been so composed, as if she were used to this kind of confrontation? Back in her home, Ayanna closed the door and leaned against it, exhaling deeply. Her heart pounded, but her resolve remained unshaken. She glanced at the documents on her desk, evidence for a case that could bring down a powerful syndicate within the city. She'd taken every precaution to protect herself and her unborn child, but tonight was a reminder that the fight for justice came at a personal cost. In the shadows of the city, the storm was beginning to gather, and both Ethan and Ayanna were at its center. Neither could have predicted how deeply their fates would intertwine, or the reckoning that lay ahead. Shadows of truth. Detective Ethan Harper spent the rest of the night staring at the files sprawled across his desk in the dimly lit precinct. The hooded figure's sudden appearance at Judge Ayanna Williams' residence gnawed at him. His gut told him there was something more significant at play, something that could finally justify his long-held suspicions about the judge. But it wasn't just the unknown intruder that had shaken him. It was Ayanna herself, her unwavering calm and her piercing gaze, as if she had seen through him completely. The precinct buzzed as the early shift arrived, officers chatting and exchanging jokes. Ethan barely noticed. His partner, Officer Lucas Kane, walked in, sipping his coffee. "Harper, you look like hell," Kane remarked, dropping into the chair across from him. "Rough night." Ethan grunted, shoving a grainy photograph across the desk. "Someone broke into Judge Williams' house last night. I was there. Couldn't catch them." Kane frowned. "What's your angle here, Ethan? Williams is untouchable. Everyone knows she's clean. Why waste time chasing shadows?" Ethan leaned forward, his eyes intense. "Nobody's untouchable, Kane. She's hiding something. I can feel it. Why else would someone target her house?" Kane sighed, used to Ethan's obsessive streak. "Just don't let this consume you. If you're wrong about her, it won't just cost your reputation. It'll blow up in your face." Ethan dismissed him with a wave, already lost in thought. Across town, Ayanna was preparing for another day in court, though her mind lingered on the events of the previous night. The security breach was more than an intrusion. It was a message. Her work on the upcoming case was no secret, and she knew she'd made enemies along the way. As she smoothed her maternity dress over her growing belly, Ayanna felt a pang of both love and worry for her unborn child. Her assistant, Janet, entered the office, balancing a tray with tea and a stack of legal briefs. "Morning, Your Honor. You look radiant as always." Ayanna smiled, though the weight in her chest made the expression feel hollow. "Thank you, Janet. Any updates from the DA?" Janet placed the tea on Ayanna's desk. "Yes, they've sent over additional evidence for the case. It's solid. If the jury sees this, there's no way they'll side with the defense." Ayanna flipped through the files, her sharp eyes scanning the evidence. It was damning. Financial records, surveillance footage, and a testimony from a key witness. This was the case that could dismantle one of the city's most notorious criminal networks. But with stakes this high, Ayanna knew that desperation could push her enemies to act recklessly. "Janet," she said, her tone serious, "tighten security. Notify the courthouse. I want all visitors logged, no exceptions. We can't afford any leaks." "Yes, Your Honor," Janet replied, sensing the gravity in her voice. Ethan's investigation led him to the archives. Poring over old cases linked to Judge Williams, he found patterns that seemed too clean, too perfect. Cases closed swiftly, evidence aligned flawlessly, and high-profile convictions that boosted her reputation. To an outsider, it would look like the work of a meticulous judge. To Ethan, it was suspiciously efficient. One case caught his attention: State versus Gallardo, a trial that had taken down a major drug lord years ago. Ethan noted the swift closure and the subsequent media praise for Ayanna. Something about it didn't sit right, so he decided to dig deeper. The name Gallardo was still whispered in the underbelly of the city. Though the kingpin himself was in prison, remnants of his operation lingered. Ethan visited a seedy bar on the city's outskirts, a known haunt for those connected to Gallardo's crew. The place reeked of cheap liquor and desperation, the kind of environment Ethan knew all too well. He approached a man at the bar, his leather jacket worn and his eyes bloodshot. "Hey," Ethan began, flashing his badge. "You know anyone who worked with Gallardo back in the day?" The man laughed bitterly. "What's it to you, cop?" Ethan leaned closer, his voice low. "I'm not here to make arrests. Just need some information." The man hesitated, then shrugged. "Yeah, Gallardo had a guy, Marcus Slim Coleman. Heard he's laying low, but still in the game." Ethan pressed for more details, eventually getting an address. As he left the bar, he felt a rush of adrenaline. If Marcus Coleman was still around, he might have answers about Ayanna's involvement in the case. That afternoon, Ayanna presided over a preliminary hearing in her packed courtroom. The defense lawyer was a smug, sharp-dressed man with a reputation for protecting the guilty. Ayanna's reputation for impartiality didn't intimidate him, but her incisive questioning rattled his client. A mid-level enforcer tied to the syndicate she aimed to dismantle. "Mr. Vargas," Ayanna said, her tone firm, "you've testified that you had no prior knowledge of the funds transferred to your account. Are we to believe this was a coincidence?" Vargas stammered, his lawyer interjecting. "Your Honor, my client has answered the question." Ayanna raised an eyebrow. "He answered nothing, counselor. I'll remind you that evading the court's questions will not be tolerated." The courtroom murmured in approval. Ayanna's authority was palpable, her presence commanding respect. But behind her composed exterior, she felt the subtle pressure of unseen eyes watching her every move. Ethan arrived at the rundown apartment complex Marcus Coleman was rumored to frequent. The building was a relic of better times, its peeling paint and cracked windows a testament to neglect. Ethan climbed the creaking stairs, his hand resting on his holstered weapon. Knocking on the door of apartment 302, he braced himself. After a tense moment, the door opened slightly, revealing a gaunt man with wary eyes. "Who's asking?" the man growled. "Detective Harper," Ethan replied. "I'm here about Gallardo." "You've got information I need." Marcus's eyes narrowed. "Gallardo's old news, man. Why are you digging up the past?" "Because I think Judge Williams isn't as clean as she looks," Ethan said bluntly. Marcus laughed dryly, shaking his head. "You're barking up the wrong tree, cop. Williams didn't play dirty. She played smart. She put Gallardo away without cutting corners." Ethan frowned. "Then why are there whispers about her? Why did someone break into her house last night?" Marcus leaned against the doorframe, his expression darkening. "Because she's got enemies, powerful ones. If you're smart, you'll leave this alone. Some people don't care if you've got a badge." Ethan left the apartment with more questions than answers. Marcus's warning echoed in his mind, but he couldn't shake his conviction that there was more to the story. That night, Ayanna returned home to find a sealed envelope slipped under her door. Her pulse quickened as she opened it, revealing a photograph of her walking into the courthouse that morning. Scrawled on the back were the words, "Your time is running out." Ayanna felt a surge of fear, but quickly steeled herself. She couldn't afford to show weakness. Not now. With her unborn child to protect and a city depending on her, she vowed to see the case through, no matter the cost. Elsewhere, Ethan sat in his darkened apartment, reviewing his notes. The edges of his world were beginning to blur, his pursuit of Ayanna consuming him. But for all his digging, he couldn't escape one growing thought. What if she wasn't the villain he had imagined? What if he was the one blinded by bias? The storm continued to gather, its thunder rumbling in the distance. Both Ayanna and Ethan were heading toward an inevitable collision, unaware of how deeply their fates were intertwined, or the explosive truth waiting to be uncovered. Breaking the mask. Detective Ethan Harper stared at the photograph pinned to the corkboard in his apartment. It was a candid shot of Judge Ayanna Williams exiting the courthouse, her expression poised, her hands resting protectively on her pregnant belly. Beneath the photo, Ethan had scribbled questions on sticky notes. What is she hiding? Why was her house targeted? Who sent the tip? The lines between his professional obsession and personal vendetta blurred further each day. Ethan's world had become consumed with unraveling Ayanna's life, and though he wouldn't admit it aloud, doubt was beginning to creep in. What if Kane and the others were right? What if he was chasing a ghost? Ethan shook off the thought and returned his focus to the latest piece of his puzzle, Marcus Coleman's warning. She played smart, not dirty, Marcus had said. But smart and dirty weren't always mutually exclusive in Ethan's eyes. He needed more, something concrete to tie Ayanna to the secrets he was sure she was keeping. Across town, Ayanna Williams was in her chambers, the envelope she'd received the previous night still on her mind. The photograph and its threatening message had unsettled her, but her determination to finish the case outweighed her fear. She placed the envelope in her desk drawer, locking it with a decisive click. Ayanna knew the risks of her work. She'd faced them before, but this felt more personal. Her phone buzzed on the desk, pulling her from her thoughts. It was her sister, Maya. "Hey, Ayanna," Maya said, her voice filled with warmth. "Just checking in. How are you feeling?" Ayanna hesitated, her hand instinctively moving to her belly. "I'm fine, Maya. Just a lot on my plate. The case is heating up." "I know you won't stop until it's done," Maya said with a hint of pride. "But don't forget to take care of yourself, okay? You've got more than just the courtroom to think about now." Ayanna smiled softly. "I know. Thanks for reminding me." As they hung up, Ayanna's resolve only deepened. Her child deserved a better world, one free from the corruption she was fighting to dismantle. She wouldn't back down, no matter the cost. Ethan's next move brought him to the courthouse archives, a sprawling basement lined with shelves of case files and evidence logs. He sought out a file clerk he'd worked with in the past, an older man named Samuel who was known for his discretion. "Samuel," Ethan said, sliding a $20 bill across the counter. "I need everything you've got on Ayanna Williams' cases, especially the Gallardo trial." Samuel eyed the money, then Ethan. "You sure you want to go digging there, detective? Williams has a lot of admirers and a lot of enemies." Ethan smirked. "Let's just say I'm interested in finding out which side I'll end up on." Samuel sighed and disappeared into the rows of shelves, returning several minutes later with a stack of files. "This is everything I could find. But be careful, this kind of digging doesn't come without consequences." Ethan nodded, scooping up the files and heading to a corner desk. He flipped through them, his eyes scanning for inconsistencies. One document caught his attention, a financial ledger from the Gallardo case. It detailed money laundering activities tied to a string of shell companies, but one entry stood out, an unaccounted-for deposit into an anonymous trust. It wasn't much, but it was enough to spark Ethan's curiosity. Anonymous trust. He muttered under his breath, pulling out his phone to run a search. What he found surprised him. The trust was linked to a foundation dedicated to funding community legal aid, a program Ayanna had championed. Ethan's suspicion wavered. Could the deposit have been legitimate, a result of Ayanna's efforts to help the underserved? Or was it a clever cover for something more sinister? Meanwhile, Ayanna was meeting with her legal team in a secure conference room. The atmosphere was tense, but focused as they prepared for the trial. Ayanna laid out the evidence on the table, her voice steady. "We have everything we need to bring them down," she said. "But we need to anticipate their defense. They'll try to paint this as a witch hunt to discredit us." One of her team members, a young prosecutor named Alina, spoke up. "Your Honor, are you sure it's safe for you to be this involved? With the threats you've received?" Ayanna held up a hand. "I'm not stepping back, Alina. This case is too important. If we win, it'll set a precedent that could change everything." Alina nodded, admiration in her eyes. Ayanna's resolve inspired her team, even as they worried for her safety. But Ayanna's mind was already racing ahead, considering every possible outcome. She couldn't afford to let her guard down. That evening, Ethan drove to the address linked to the anonymous trust, a modest office building in a quieter part of the city. Inside, he found a small but bustling legal aid office. Lawyers and volunteers moved between desks, working with clients on everything from eviction cases to wrongful convictions. Ethan approached a receptionist. "I'm Detective Harper. I need to speak to whoever runs this place." The receptionist hesitated but eventually led him to a glass-walled office where a middle-aged woman sat reviewing case files. She looked up as he entered. "Detective," she said, standing and extending a hand. "I'm Gloria Ramirez, the director here. How can I help you?" Ethan got straight to the point. "This organization is linked to an anonymous trust that received a suspicious deposit during the Gallardo case. Can you explain that?" Gloria frowned, her brows knitting together. "That trust funds our operations, Detective. Every penny is accounted for. If you're implying something illegal—" "I'm implying nothing," Ethan interrupted, though his tone was sharp. "I just want answers." Gloria's frown deepened, but she remained calm. The trust was established by Judge Williams to ensure legal aid for those who can't afford it. She's one of our strongest supporters, and her integrity is beyond reproach. Whatever you're looking for, you won't find it here. Ethan left the office feeling more conflicted than ever. The more he uncovered, the harder it was to justify his suspicion of Ayanna. Yet his pride wouldn't let him back down. There had to be something, some flaw that would prove he was right. Back at her home, Ayanna found herself unable to sleep. She sat by the window, looking out at the quiet street. Her thoughts were interrupted by a movement outside, a shadow passing by her gate. Her heart raced, but she stayed calm, her hand moving instinctively to her phone. "Security," she said when the call connected. "Check the perimeter. I saw movement." Minutes later, her private security team reported back. "All clear, Your Honor. Likely just a stray animal." Ayanna thanked them, but her unease lingered. She couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. The following day, Ethan arrived at the precinct to find a sealed envelope on his desk. Inside was a single photograph. Ayanna in her chambers, reviewing case files. Written across the bottom were the words, "You're not the only one watching her." Ethan's blood ran cold. For the first time, he realized that his investigation might have drawn attention not just to Ayanna, but to himself. He wasn't the only one playing this game, and the stakes were higher than he'd anticipated. As Ayanna and Ethan continued down their respective paths, their lives grew more deeply entwined. Neither could see the full picture yet, but the storm that had been gathering was about to break, and it would change everything. Storms of revelation. Ethan Harper sat in his apartment, the photograph from the anonymous sender lying on his coffee table. It was a clear shot of Judge Ayanna Williams, her face illuminated by the light of her desk lamp, completely unaware she was being watched. The ominous message scrawled beneath it, "You're not the only one watching her," replayed in his mind like a siren. For the first time in weeks, Ethan felt genuinely unnerved. He had spent weeks scrutinizing Ayanna, convinced she was hiding something. But this photo and the message made it clear. Someone else was out there, someone with far more dangerous intentions. Ethan grabbed his phone and called his partner, Kane. "Kane, I need you to pull surveillance footage near Ayanna Williams' chambers over the last few days," Ethan said, his voice tense. "What's this about?" Kane asked, a mix of curiosity and concern. Ethan hesitated before replying. "I think she's being targeted by someone bigger than we thought. Just get me the footage." Kane agreed, though skepticism lingered in his tone. Ethan hung up and ran a hand through his hair, frustration mounting. His obsession with Ayanna had put her in danger, and now he was caught in a web that was quickly unraveling. Ayanna Williams, unaware of the photograph or the intensifying surveillance around her, sat in her chambers reviewing the final details of the case. The trial was days away, and her team had gathered enough evidence to dismantle one of the city's most entrenched criminal syndicates. The courtroom battle would be fierce, but Ayanna felt ready. Janet, her assistant, entered with a concerned look. "Your Honor, there's been another security breach. This time, someone accessed your personal email." Ayanna froze. "How is that possible? I've had cybersecurity monitoring my accounts." Janet shook her head. "Whoever it is, they're good. They didn't leave much of a trail. The IT team is investigating." Ayanna leaned back in her chair, her mind racing. "Janet, increase security on everything. My home, my office, even this courthouse. We can't take any chances." Janet nodded and left the room. Alone again, Ayanna felt a weight pressing down on her. The threats were escalating, and the shadowy figure that had breached her home now seemed to be targeting every part of her life. But she couldn't let fear dictate her actions. Too much was at stake. Ethan met Kane later that evening in a surveillance room at the precinct. Kane had managed to pull footage from the cameras near Ayanna's chambers. The two of them huddled around the monitor as the recordings played. "There," Ethan said, pointing at a figure loitering near the building's entrance. The timestamp showed it was taken late at night, well after Ayanna had left for the day. Kane zoomed in, but the figure was heavily obscured by shadows and a hoodie. "Can't get a clear face," Kane muttered. "But look at the way they're moving. Calculated, deliberate. This isn't some random loiterer." Ethan nodded. "Whoever it is, they're not just watching her. They're planning something." Kane glanced at Ethan. "This doesn't feel like your usual obsession with proving someone guilty. What's going on, Harper?" Ethan hesitated, then sighed. "I think I've been wrong about her, Kane. I don't know what I was chasing anymore. But now, I'm sure of one thing. She's in real danger." Kane leaned back in his chair, surprised by Ethan's admission. "That's a hell of a turnaround. So, what's the play?" "We find out who's behind this," Ethan said firmly. "And we stop them." As Ayanna left the courthouse that night, the streets were eerily quiet. Her driver, Marcus, was waiting by the car, holding the door open for her. "Evening, Your Honor," Marcus said with a nod. "Thank you, Marcus," Ayanna replied, her voice tinged with exhaustion. The drive home was uneventful until they reached her neighborhood. As the car approached her gated home, Marcus slowed to a stop. Ayanna looked up and saw two men standing by the gate, their silhouettes dark against the streetlights. "Stay here," Marcus said, his tone protective. He stepped out of the car, leaving the engine running. "Can I help you?" Marcus called out to the men. One of them stepped forward, his posture menacing. "We're just here to deliver a message for the judge. Let her know she should think twice about the case she's pushing." Ayanna's heart raced as she watched from the car. Marcus, though older, stood his ground. "Why don't you deliver it yourself?" Marcus said, his voice steady. The man smirked. "We already have." Before Marcus could react, the second man tossed a small object over the gate. It landed on Ayanna's doorstep with a sharp metallic clink. The men walked away without another word, disappearing into the night. Marcus hurried back to the car, his face pale. "Stay here, Your Honor." He approached the object cautiously, his flashlight revealing what it was, a small package wrapped in brown paper, with a single word scrawled across it. "Stop." Marcus called security, who arrived minutes later to inspect the package. Inside, they found a burned courtroom gavel, a chilling symbol of what the syndicate intended to destroy. Ethan got the call about the incident early the next morning. He arrived at Ayanna's home to find her security team on high alert, the area around her house cordoned off. Ayanna stood on her porch, speaking with Marcus and a lead officer. Her composure was intact, but Ethan could see the tension in her eyes. "Judge Williams," Ethan said, approaching cautiously. Ayanna turned to him, her gaze wary. "Detective Harper, what brings you here?" "I heard about the threat," Ethan said. "I wanted to make sure you were safe." Ayanna raised an eyebrow. "Concern for my safety isn't something I expected from you, Detective. Last I checked, you were more interested in proving I was guilty of something." Ethan exhaled, knowing he deserved her skepticism. "I was wrong about you, Judge. And now, I think someone else is targeting you. Let me help." Ayanna studied him for a long moment before nodding. "If you're serious, Detective, then I'll accept your help. But understand this, I won't let fear stop me from doing what's right." Ethan nodded, a flicker of admiration crossing his face. "Neither will I." The uneasy alliance between Ayanna and Ethan began that day. Together, they worked to uncover who was behind the escalating threats. As they delved deeper, they discovered a tangled web of corruption that went beyond the syndicate Ayanna was prosecuting. Politicians, business leaders, and even law enforcement officers were involved, people who had a vested interest in silencing her. As the trial approached, the danger intensified. Ayanna's home became a fortress, guarded around the clock. Ethan, for the first time in years, found himself driven by a purpose greater than his own ambitions. He wasn't just protecting Ayanna, he was fighting for redemption. But the closer they came to the truth, the more dangerous the game became. The storm was no longer on the horizon. It was here. And neither Ayanna nor Ethan could predict how it would end. The reckoning. The tension was palpable as Ayanna Williams prepared for the trial that would determine the fate of one of the most powerful criminal syndicates in the country. Her chambers, usually a place of calm focus, now felt like the eye of a storm. Every corner seemed to hold a whisper of danger, every shadow a potential threat. Yet Ayanna remained resolute. Her unborn child moved within her, a gentle reminder of what she was fighting for. Ayanna placed her hand on her belly, drawing strength from the life she carried. "Your Honor," Janet said, peeking through the door. "Detective Harper is here to see you." Ayanna straightened. She had allowed Ethan into her inner circle, though the decision wasn't without reservations. His dogged pursuit of her guilt had almost destroyed her reputation, but his recent actions suggested a man seeking redemption. "Send him in," Ayanna said. Ethan entered, his usual confidence subdued. He carried a folder under his arm and a grim expression on his face. "Judge Williams," he began, his tone measured. "We need to talk." Ayanna gestured for him to sit. "What is it, Detective?" Ethan placed the folder on her desk and opened it to reveal photographs, bank records, and a list of names. "This is bigger than the syndicate you're prosecuting. These people, politicians, officers, even some judges, are part of a network tied to organized crime. They're funding it, protecting it, and profiting from it." Ayanna's sharp eyes scanned the documents. Her jaw tightened as she recognized some of the names. "You're saying the syndicate is just the tip of the iceberg?" Ethan nodded. "They'll stop at nothing to protect their interests. The threats you've been receiving, they're not just from the syndicate. These people are scared of what your case might expose." Ayanna leaned back in her chair, her mind racing. "And you? Why are you bringing this to me now?" Ethan's gaze didn't waver. "Because I was wrong about you, Judge. I thought you were part of the problem. But now I see you're the only one willing to fight it. Let me help you finish what you started." Ayanna studied him for a long moment, searching for any sign of insincerity. She found none. "If we do this, Detective, there's no turning back. Are you ready for that?" "I am," Ethan said without hesitation. The days leading up to the trial were a blur of activity. Ayanna and Ethan worked tirelessly, piecing together the evidence that would not only convict the syndicate, but also shine a light on the broader corruption at play. Ayanna's legal team was kept in the dark about the deeper investigation, their focus remaining solely on the case at hand. The night before the trial, Ethan received an anonymous call. The voice on the other end was distorted, but the message was clear. "You think you can win this? Walk away, Harper. This isn't your fight." Ethan gripped the phone tightly. "It is now." The line went dead, leaving Ethan with a sense of foreboding. He had spent years turning a blind eye to the corruption around him, but now, standing up to it felt both terrifying and exhilarating. The courtroom was packed on the first day of the trial. Journalists filled the gallery, their cameras capturing every movement, every expression. The defendants sat with their lawyers, their faces a mixture of arrogance and unease. They had spent years operating with impunity, but Ayanna's case threatened to dismantle their empire. As Ayanna entered the courtroom, the room fell silent. She moved with an air of authority, her head held high despite the weight of the moment. Ethan watched from a discreet corner, his eyes scanning the room for anything suspicious. The prosecution's opening arguments were damning. Ayanna's team presented a narrative of greed, violence, and corruption, supported by compelling evidence. Witnesses testified about the syndicate's operations, from drug trafficking to money laundering. Each testimony brought the defendants closer to conviction. But the defense was ruthless. They attacked the credibility of the witnesses, questioned the validity of the evidence, and painted Ayanna as a crusader with a personal vendetta. During a recess, Ayanna returned to her chambers to regroup. Ethan joined her, his expression tense. "They're pulling out all the stops," Ethan said, "but we've got the truth on our side." Ayanna gave a faint smile. "The truth isn't always enough, Detective. Sometimes it takes more." That evening, Ethan received another call, this time from Marcus, Ayanna's driver. "Detective, you need to come to the judge's house now." Ethan's heart raced as he drove to Ayanna's home. When he arrived, Marcus was waiting by the gate, his face pale. "What happened?" Ethan demanded. "They broke in," Marcus said. "No one's hurt, but they ransacked her office." Ethan rushed inside, finding Ayanna standing amidst the chaos. Her desk had been overturned, papers strewn across the floor. A single piece of paper had been left on the desk, weighted down by a bullet casing. Written on it were the words, "This is your last warning." Ayanna's face was pale but resolute. "They're trying to scare me," she said, "but it won't work." Ethan approached her, his voice firm. "We need to move you to a secure location. They're escalating, and I won't take chances with your safety." Ayanna hesitated, then nodded. "Fine, but we continue preparing for the trial. They won't stop me." As the trial progressed, the tension inside and outside the courtroom grew. Protesters gathered outside, some demanding justice, others supporting the defendants. Security was tightened, and Ethan remained vigilant, always scanning for potential threats. On the final day of the trial, the prosecution delivered its closing arguments, tying together weeks of evidence and testimony. Ayanna's voice was steady as she addressed the jury. "This case isn't just about these defendants," she said. "It's about the system that allowed them to thrive. It's about the people who suffered while others profited. And it's about justice, not just for today, but for the future." The jury deliberated late into the night, the city holding its breath as they awaited the verdict. Ethan and Ayanna stayed in a secure room at the courthouse, their nerves frayed but their resolve intact. Finally, word came. The jury had reached a decision. The courtroom was silent as the foreperson stood to deliver the verdict. On the charge of conspiracy to commit organized crime, we find the defendants guilty. The gallery erupted in gasps and murmurs. Ayanna felt a wave of relief wash over her. The battle wasn't over, but this victory was a monumental step forward. As the defendants were escorted out, one of them turned to Ayanna, his expression dark. "This isn't over," he hissed. Ethan stepped forward, his hand instinctively moving to his sidearm. "You're done," he said coldly. "Get out of her sight." That night, Ayanna returned home, exhausted but triumphant. Ethan stood watch outside, his presence a reminder of the dangers that still lingered. For the first time in weeks, Ayanna allowed herself a moment of peace, resting her hand on her belly and whispering a silent promise to her child. "You will grow up in a better world." But in the shadows, the enemies Ayanna and Ethan had made were regrouping. The storm wasn't over. It was only gathering strength for one final, devastating strike. The final stand. The trial's verdict sent shockwaves across the city. News outlets ran nonstop coverage of the case, hailing Judge Ayanna Williams as a fearless beacon of justice. Protesters in support of her reforms rallied at the courthouse steps, their signs reading, "Justice prevails," and "No more corruption." But beneath the surface of celebration, danger brewed like a storm ready to break. Ayanna sat in her chambers late into the evening, surrounded by the remnants of her courtroom battle. Stacks of evidence, scattered notes, and photographs of the syndicate members now facing life sentences. She was exhausted, but her resolve remained unshaken. She thought of her unborn child, the life she had fought so hard to protect, and the better world she was determined to create. A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. It was Detective Ethan Harper. "Judge Williams," he said, his face shadowed with concern. "We've got a problem." Ayanna gestured for him to sit. "What now, Detective?" Ethan placed a folder on her desk and opened it. Inside were surveillance photos, phone transcripts, and encrypted messages. The syndicate wasn't the end of this. They were part of something bigger, an operation that involves high-ranking officials, police officers, and even judges. The trial put them on edge, and now they're coming for you. Ayanna's expression didn't falter. "What do you suggest?" Ethan leaned forward, his voice low. "You need to disappear, at least until we can bring these people down. Staying here puts you and your baby at too much risk." Ayanna shook her head. "I won't run, Detective. That's not who I am. If they want to fight, they'll find me ready." Ethan exhaled sharply. "With all due respect, Judge, this isn't just about you anymore. It's about your child. If you won't do it for yourself, do it for them." Ayanna's hand instinctively moved to her belly. The truth in Ethan's words stung, but she couldn't ignore them. "What's your plan?" The next morning, Ayanna's home was vacated, her security detail tripled. Ethan had arranged for her to stay in a secure, safe house on the outskirts of the city, a place known only to a select few. The house was modest but well guarded, surrounded by dense woods and equipped with state-of-the-art surveillance. Ayanna's sister, Maya, joined her there, providing comfort and familiarity in the isolating environment. Ethan visited daily, updating her on the investigation and ensuring the security protocols remained airtight. But the enemies they faced were resourceful. A week after the trial, Ethan intercepted an encrypted communication that sent chills down his spine. The message detailed a coordinated plan to eliminate Ayanna and her allies. It was signed with a chilling alias, the Foundation, a name that had surfaced multiple times in his investigation. The Foundation was a clandestine group of elites who operated above the law, pulling strings to maintain their control. Ethan immediately informed Ayanna. "They're planning something big," he said, pacing the room. "I don't know when or where, but it's coming." Ayanna nodded, her calm demeanor unwavering. "Then we prepare." The attack came 3 nights later. It was past midnight, and the safe house was cloaked in darkness. Ayanna was asleep in her room, Maya in the adjoining guest room. Ethan sat in the surveillance room, his eyes fixed on the monitors. The forest surrounding the house was still, the faint hum of crickets the only sound. Then he saw it, movement on the northern perimeter. "Code red," Ethan said into his radio, alerting the security team. "We've got company." The guards sprang into action, their flashlights cutting through the darkness as they searched the perimeter. Ethan grabbed his weapon and moved toward Ayanna's room. "Judge, wake up," he said, shaking her shoulder gently. Ayanna stirred, her eyes opening groggily. "What is it?" "They're here," Ethan said, his voice firm. "We need to move." Ayanna didn't argue. She got out of bed and followed Ethan, her heart pounding as he led her to a hidden panic room in the basement. Maya was already there, her face pale but resolute. "Stay here," Ethan said, locking the door behind them. "I'll handle this." Outside, the assailants moved with precision, their faces obscured by masks. They were armed and coordinated, using the forest as cover. The security team engaged them in a tense standoff, gunfire echoing through the night. Ethan joined the fray, his training kicking in. He moved through the shadows, taking out one assailant with a well-aimed shot before ducking behind a tree. Adrenaline coursed through him as he realized the attackers weren't ordinary thugs. They were professionals, likely hired by the Foundation. The battle raged for what felt like hours but was only minutes. Slowly, the attackers were pushed back, their numbers dwindling. Finally, the forest fell silent. When the dust settled, Ethan returned to the panic room, his body bruised and his breathing labored. He unlocked the door and found Ayanna and Maya waiting, their faces filled with relief. "It's over," he said, though he knew it wasn't entirely true. This was just the first wave. The next day, Ethan and Ayanna met with a trusted federal prosecutor. They presented the evidence they had gathered on the Foundation, detailing its connections to the city's power structure. The prosecutor listened intently, her face grim. "This is explosive," she said, "but if we're going to take them down, we need airtight evidence and coordinated action. Otherwise, they'll slip through our fingers." Ayanna leaned forward, her voice firm. "We'll get what you need, but we can't delay. They've already proven they're willing to kill to protect themselves." The final confrontation came weeks later, in a federal raid orchestrated with meticulous precision. The operation targeted multiple locations simultaneously, dismantling the Foundation's infrastructure and arresting its key members. Ethan and Ayanna watched the news coverage from a secure location. For the first time in months, Ayanna felt a sense of closure. Justice had prevailed, though the cost had been steep. In the weeks that followed, Ayanna returned to her courtroom, resuming her work with a renewed sense of purpose. Her child was born in the early spring, a symbol of hope and resilience. Ethan, having proven his loyalty, continued his work in law enforcement, this time with a clearer understanding of justice and his role within it. Their paths diverged but remained intertwined, each carrying the scars of their battle and the lessons it had taught them. Together, they had faced the storm, and together, they had emerged stronger. The city was far from perfect, but change had begun, and it was unstoppable. The price of justice. The morning after the coordinated raid on the Foundation, the city woke to headlines declaring the fall of one of the most insidious criminal organizations in its history. News stations broadcast footage of high-ranking officials being led away in handcuffs, their once imposing faces pale and drawn. The public reaction was electric: relief, celebration, and a renewed belief that justice could prevail. But for Ayanna Williams and Ethan Harper, the victory was bittersweet. In the aftermath of the raid, Ayanna stood in the courthouse chambers where she had spent countless hours dispensing justice. Her heart felt heavy as she thought about the lives lost during the fight against the Foundation, including several members of her security detail during the assault on the safe house. She had known the stakes were high, but the toll weighed on her nonetheless. Maya entered the room, holding Ayanna's newborn son. His tiny fingers curled around Maya's as he slept peacefully. "You did it, Ayanna," Maya said softly. "The city is safer because of you." Ayanna looked at her son, her lips curving into a small, tired smile. "He deserves a world where people like the Foundation don't hold the strings." Maya nodded. "And because of you, he has a chance at that." Ethan Harper, meanwhile, faced a reckoning of his own. Despite his critical role in dismantling the Foundation, his history of unchecked prejudice and questionable decisions couldn't be ignored. Internal Affairs launched an investigation into his past cases, spurred by the revelations Ayanna's trial had brought to light. Ethan didn't resist. For the first time, he faced his mistakes head-on, admitting to his failings and the harm they had caused. He offered to cooperate fully, providing testimony that helped uncover further corruption within the police department. "You don't have to do this," Kane told him one evening over drinks, their usual camaraderie strained by the weight of the investigation. "I do," Ethan replied firmly. "If I'd learned anything from all this, it's that justice doesn't happen without accountability. I was part of the problem. Now it's time to be part of the solution." Months later, Ayanna presided over one of the final trials linked to the Foundation's network. As she delivered the sentence, a life term for one of the key architects of the operation, her voice was steady, her resolve unshaken. The courtroom erupted in applause as the defendant was led away, a symbolic end to the city's darkest chapter. After the trial, Ayanna found Ethan waiting for her outside the courthouse. His badge was gone, and his suit was more casual than she was used to seeing. "Detective Harper," she greeted, a trace of a smile on her lips. "Just Ethan now," he replied, his tone light but sincere. "I wanted to thank you, Judge Williams, for everything." Ayanna nodded, her expression softening. "You've come a long way, Ethan. It takes courage to face yourself and make things right." He shrugged. "You showed me what real justice looks like. The least I could do was follow your example." They stood in silence for a moment, the city bustling around them, before Ethan extended his hand. "Good luck, Ayanna." She shook his hand firmly. "To you as well, Ethan." As the seasons changed, the city began to heal. Ayanna's reforms inspired a new generation of leaders, lawyers, and activists committed to dismantling the systemic injustices that had allowed the Foundation to thrive. Her courtroom became a symbol of fairness, a place where the powerful were held accountable and the vulnerable found protection. Ethan, no longer a detective, took a quieter path. He dedicated himself to community outreach, mentoring young people, and sharing his story as a cautionary tale. He found purpose in his new role, using his experience to guide others away from the mistakes he had made. Ayanna's son grew up surrounded by love and stories of his mother's bravery. He became a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming darkness, hope and resilience could prevail. Epilogue. A brighter tomorrow. Years later, Ayanna sat on a park bench, watching her son chase a kite in the open field. The wind carried his laughter, a melody that brought a rare lightness to her heart. Maya sat beside her, reading aloud from a book about social justice movements inspired by Ayanna's work. "You've made a real difference," Maya said, closing the book and glancing at her sister. "People will remember your name for generations." Ayanna smiled, her gaze fixed on her son. "I don't care if they remember my name, Maya. I care that they remember what's possible when we refuse to back down." In the distance, Ethan watched from the edge of the park, a quiet observer of the family he had helped protect. He didn't approach. His presence was unnecessary. Knowing Ayanna and her son were safe was enough. As the sun dipped below the horizon, its warm hues painting the sky, the city seemed to exhale. It wasn't perfect. It never would be. But it was better. And for Ayanna, Ethan, and all those who had fought for it, that was a legacy worth fighting for.